My future daughter-in-law uninvited me from my son's wedding in a group text, calling my grief stressful. She thought she was hiring a random caterer for her perfect day, but she was about to learn a hard lesson. The quiet, grieving father-in-law she dismissed is the secret owner of that company, and I had just made one small change to her order. Before we dive into this intense story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We'd also love to know where you're all tuning in from. Let us know in the comments. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, a sharp, intrusive vibration against the polished wood my wife, Evelyn, had chosen decades ago. It was one of the few sounds that could cut through the thick silence of the house these days. I had been sitting in the dark, nursing a glass of water and trying to find the energy to get ready for bed. It had been 2 years since Evelyn passed, but some nights, the quiet still felt loud, as if it were a presence of its own, reminding me of the voice that was missing. I reached for the phone, squinting at the screen. It was a notification from a group chat named Leo and Chloe's Big Day. My son Leo had added me to it a few weeks prior. It was mostly filled with Chloe's relentless updates, dress fittings, floral arrangements, and polls about napkin colors. I rarely looked at it, finding the digital chatter exhausting. But this message was different. It was a long block of text from Chloe herself, and my name was tagged in it. I tapped it open, my finger tracing the cool glass. My heart, already a fragile vessel these days, gave a painful lurch. "Hi everyone," it began, infused with a synthetic cheerfulness I had come to recognize as uniquely Chloe's. "Just a quick but important update as we get closer to the wedding. Leo and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the atmosphere we want to create for our special day. It's all about positive vibes and happy memories. For that reason, we've had to make a very difficult decision." I kept reading, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I could feel where this was going, the way you can feel a storm coming long before the first drop of rain. "At Glen," her message continued, my own name feeling alien and accused on the screen. "We know how much you are still processing your grief, and we admire your strength. However, we feel that your presence at the wedding itself might be a source of stress and sadness, both for you and for us. We want to be surrounded by nothing but joy. It's just too much pressure to worry about whether you're okay during our ceremony." Each word was a carefully polished stone, smooth on the surface but heavy and hard underneath. She was framing her cruelty as compassion. "So, to make sure you can still be a part of it without any of the stress, we've arranged for a private live stream. You can watch the entire ceremony and reception from the comfort of your own home. We'll even make sure to give you a shout-out. We know you'll understand. We love you." The message ended with a string of heart emojis, little pink icons of cheerful dismissal. I read it once, then twice. My mind struggled to catch up with the emotional blow. Uninvited from my only son's wedding, not with a phone call, not in person, but in a group chat for all of her friends and distant relatives to see. I was being publicly demoted from father of the groom to a remote spectator. The reason? My grief. My love for my wife, the mother of the man she was about to marry, was being framed as an inconvenience, a black cloud on her perfectly curated sunny day. My hands began to tremble. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the calculated coldness of it, the way she had weaponized my deepest pain and presented it as a party planning problem. My son, Leo, was in this group chat. I scrolled up, searching for any sign of him, any defense, any pushback. There was nothing, just a single telling like on her message from his account. He had approved this. He had let her do this. A wave of something cold and hollow washed over me, more profound than the grief I lived with daily. This felt different. Grief was the absence of love. This was its rejection. This was a deliberate act of being cast aside. I looked around the silent room, at the framed photo of Evelyn and a much younger, smiling Leo on the mantelpiece. Her eyes seemed to look back at me, full of the warmth and fire that Chloe had just tried to extinguish. The phone buzzed again with notifications. Other people were responding now. "So thoughtful of you, Chloe," one wrote. "Such a modern solution," another chimed in. They were celebrating my exile. I felt an impulse to write back, to defend myself, to rage against the injustice. But what could I say? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, clumsy and shaking. Then an idea, a flicker of something that wasn't rage or sorrow, but a cold, clear resolve, began to form in my mind. She wanted to manage my stress. Fine, I would be the calmest man she had ever met. With a strange sense of detachment, I navigated to the emoji keyboard. I scrolled past the angry faces and the crying faces until I found it. The simple, non-committal, and utterly infuriating thumbs-up emoji. I tapped it and sent it. No words, no explanation, just that. It was a digital shrug, a gesture of hollow agreement that said nothing and everything at once. Then I set the phone back down on the nightstand, the screen glowing with my silent reply. Chloe and Leo thought they had solved their problem. They thought they had neatly packaged up my grief and set it aside. But as I stared at the picture of my wife, the woman who had built an empire on taste, elegance, and an unshakable will, I knew this wasn't over. The betrayal was worse than any loneliness I had ever felt. The 24 hours that followed the group text were a masterclass in silence. My thumbs-up emoji hung in the chat, a solitary island of compliance in a sea of effusive praise for Chloe's sensitivity. Neither she nor Leo reached out to me directly. There was no follow-up call, no private message to soften the blow. My silent agreement was all they needed. They had my permission, and now they could proceed guilt-free. The quiet in my house grew heavier, no longer just a symptom of loss, but now a symbol of my exclusion. I walked through the rooms that Evelyn and I had built together, running my hand over the furniture she'd picked out, staring at the garden she had lovingly cultivated. Every corner of this house was a monument to our life, to the family we had raised within these walls. Now, I was being told that the memories held here, the very essence of our family, were too sad for a celebration. On the second day, my phone finally rang. It was Leo. I let it ring 3 times before answering, taking a deep breath to steady my voice. I promised myself I would not give him the satisfaction of hearing me break. "Hey, Dad," he said. His voice was strained, unnaturally casual. "Just checking in. How are you doing?" "I'm fine, Leo," I replied, my tone deliberately even. "Just getting some things done around the house. Why do you ask?" I wanted to make him say it. I wasn't going to let him dance around the wound he had helped inflict. There was a pause. I could hear him shuffling on the other end. Well, you know, Chloe's message. I just wanted to make sure you understood." "Understood what?" I asked, my voice remaining placid. It seemed perfectly clear. Chloe wants a wedding with no stress, and she feels my presence would be stressful. You've arranged for a live stream. I believe I gave it a thumbs up. Was there something I missed? The sarcasm was subtle, but it was there, a thin layer of ice over a deep, cold lake. Leo sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. "Dad, please don't be like this." "Like what, son?" I asked. "I'm agreeing, I'm not fighting you. I'm respecting your fiancé's wishes. Isn't that what you wanted?" "It's not like that," he mumbled, his voice dropping. "Chloe is she's under a lot of pressure. This wedding has to be perfect for her. Her whole brand is about perfection, you know. It's her career. She just doesn't want any complications." Grief, my love for his mother, was a complication. The word stung, but I held my ground. "I see, and my attending the wedding would be a complication." "It would just be hard for her," he said, his voice pleading now. "She'd be worrying about you if you were feeling sad, if people were looking at you. It's easier this way. For everyone." "For everyone? Or for Chloe?" I didn't ask. I already knew the answer. In that moment, I saw my son not as a man, but as a mouthpiece for his fiancé's anxieties, a puppet whose strings were pulled by the demands of a social media feed. He was so caught up in her world of curated images and flawless aesthetics that he had forgotten the texture of real life, the messiness of real love and loss. "All right, Leo," I said, my voice softening just enough to sound like weary acceptance. "I understand, don't worry about me. I'll be fine." We ended the call a few moments later. The conversation had done nothing to heal the rift, it had only revealed its depth. He hadn't apologized, he had justified. I walked into my home office, the one I'd shared with Evelyn for so many years. It was where we had launched our dream. On the wall hung the original framed logo for Evelyn's Table, the catering company she had started from our kitchen and built into one of the most respected culinary businesses in the state. After she was gone, I took over, not as the face of the company but as its silent guardian. I kept her name on everything. I made sure her standards of excellence were never compromised. Very few people, outside of my senior staff and my lawyer, knew I was the owner. To the world, and apparently to my future daughter-in-law, it was due. It's a prestigious company with a good reputation. And that was the crucial thing. They saw me as Glenn, the sad, retired widower, a man to be managed, pitied, and ultimately sidelined. They had forgotten who I was and, more importantly, who my Evelyn was. A new kind of energy began to move through me, displacing the heavy fog of sorrow. It was the same focus I'd felt when Evelyn and I were fighting to get our business off the ground, the same quiet determination. Chloe wanted a perfect wedding. She had hired the best caterer in the city to ensure it. She had no idea that the complication she had just uninvited held the keys to the entire event. I sat down at the desk and turned on my computer. It was time to review the contract for Leo and Chloe's big day. It was time to see exactly what kind of perfection my daughter-in-law had paid for. They had forgotten who I was, and I was about to give them a very clear reminder. My life with Evelyn was a partnership in every sense of the word. We were two halves of a whole. I was the steady, quiet planner, the one who saw the structure and the numbers. She was the fire, the creative force with a palate so refined she could name every spice in a dish from a single taste. Together, we were formidable. When Leo was born, our world, which had already felt complete, expanded in ways we never imagined. I worked 2 jobs in those early years so Evelyn could stay home with him, but even then, her passion for food was the vibrant heart of our family. Our home was always filled with the smell of baking bread or simmering sauces. She was the one who decided to turn that passion into a business. Evelyn's Table started with her making cakes for friends' birthdays. Soon it was small dinner parties, then office luncheons. I handled the books and the logistics at night after my day job. I watched, in awe, as she built her reputation on quality, elegance, and an almost supernatural ability to know exactly what a client wanted, even before they did. By the time Leo was in high school, Evelyn's Table was no longer a side project, it was an institution. We had a commercial kitchen, a full staff, and a fleet of vans. I was able to quit my other job and join her full-time, working in the background as I always preferred. It was her name, her vision, her legacy. We poured everything we had into that business, not just for us but for Leo. We wanted him to have every opportunity to follow his own dreams without the financial struggles we had faced. We paid for his college education outright, bought him his first car, and gave him the down payment for his first apartment. We never asked for anything in return except that he be a good, kind man. For a long time he was. Then he met Chloe. From the start, something about her felt off. She wasn't just a social media influencer. She was a curator of a life that didn't seem entirely real. Her online presence was a flawless gallery of expensive brunches, sponsored vacations, and carefully posed, candid moments. When we first met her, she was polished to a high sheen, from her designer handbag to her perfectly articulated compliments. "Oh, Mr. Miller," she'd said, shaking my hand with a grip that was surprisingly firm, "Leo has told me so much about you. And your home, it's so authentic." The word hung in the air, a backhanded compliment disguised as praise. Authentic. To her, that meant old, outdated. She walked through our living room, her eyes scanning everything with a polite but critical gaze, as if she were assessing a museum exhibit. She commented on the vintage furniture Evelyn had spent months selecting, the quaint garden Evelyn had poured her soul into. After Evelyn's passing, Chloe's subtle condescension became more pronounced. She treated my grief like an embarrassing condition that needed to be managed. At family dinners, if I was quiet for a moment too long, she would jump in with a loud, cheerful anecdote, steering the conversation into shallower waters. She'd pat my arm and say things like, "We have to keep your spirits up, Glenn," as if my sorrow were a personal failing. She never spoke of Evelyn. It was as if, in her mind, my wife had been erased, leaving behind only the inconvenient mess of my mourning. Leo, caught in her orbit, began to adopt her perspective. He'd call and say, "Chloe's worried about you. She thinks you're not getting out enough." They saw my loyalty to Evelyn's memory not as love, but as a problem to be solved. The ultimate irony, of course, was her choice of caterer. She had done her research, as she did for everything. She wanted the best, the most prestigious, the one that would look most impressive on her wedding blog. She chose Evelyn's table without a flicker of recognition, blinded by its 5-star reviews and glossy portfolio. To her, it was just a brand, a vendor to be hired. She had no idea she was stepping into the very heart of the legacy she so casually dismissed. She was planning her perfect future in the house my wife built, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that she would never appreciate the history she was trying to overwrite. This wasn't just about being uninvited to a party. It was about her attempting to erase my wife, and I could not let that stand. They had forgotten who we were, and it was my duty to remind them. The decision to act settled over me not like a storm, but like a calm, cold morning. The emotional turmoil of the past few days began to crystallize into a single point of focus. This was no longer about my own hurt feelings. It was about defending Evelyn's honor. Chloe and Leo had unknowingly handed me the perfect stage, the perfect tools, and the perfect moment to make a statement they would never forget. My investigation didn't require a private eye or any cloak and dagger work. All the evidence I needed was waiting for me in my own company's files. I called my general manager, a wonderful woman named Maria who had been Evelyn's first hire. Maria knew the business inside and out, and more importantly, she had loved Evelyn like a sister. She was one of the few who knew I was the active owner. "Maria," I said over the phone, "I need you to pull the file for the Leo and Chloe wedding. I want to see every note, every email, every request." "Of course, Glenn," she said, her voice warm but with an undercurrent of concern. "Is everything all right? I saw your son's name on the booking, but I didn't want to pry." "Everything is fine, Maria. I'm just taking a personal interest in this particular event," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Send it over to my private email, please." Within the hour, the file arrived. It was a thick digital dossier detailing months of correspondence between Chloe and my top event coordinator. I poured a cup of coffee and began to read, and with every page my resolve hardened. Chloe's vision for the wedding was, in a word, extravagant. She wanted a champagne tower, an oyster bar, and a custom ice sculpture of her and Leo's initials. But it was in the detailed notes from the tasting session that I found what I was looking for. The notes were typed up by the coordinator, quoting Chloe directly. "Client is very specific about the aesthetic, wants modern elegance, not old-fashioned country club." A small muscle twitched in my jaw. Evelyn's style, which was timeless and classic, was being dismissed as old-fashioned. I read on. The notes on the cake tasting were even more damning. Chloe sampled the Evelyn's signature lemon and elderflower cake. Her comment, "It's nice, I guess, but a little simple. It feels like something my grandmother would serve. We need a showstopper, something for the photos." That was Evelyn's personal recipe, the one she'd perfected over years, the one that had won awards and had been featured in magazines. The cake that I had eaten a slice of every year on our anniversary. To Chloe, it was simple, grandmotherly. The final entry cemented my plan. Final cake decision, a 5-tier architectural masterpiece, white fondant with cascading sugar flowers and edible gold leaf. Flavors to be vanilla bean, chocolate truffle, and salted caramel. The design must be grand and impressive. Client emphasized multiple times that the cake cutting is a key content moment, and it needs to be absolutely epic. Epic, a key content moment. She wasn't planning a marriage. She was producing a show. She had sneered at the heart and soul of Evelyn's craft and ordered a monument to her own vanity instead. That was it, the turning point. My grief morphed into a quiet, righteous anger. She wanted a showstopper. I'd give her one, but it wouldn't be the one she was expecting. I called Maria back. "Maria," I began, my voice calm and firm. "I'm going to make a change to the Leo and Chloe order, a significant one. I need you to listen very carefully, and I need you to ensure that no one else on staff is aware of this change until the day of the wedding." "Glenn, what is it?" she asked, a nervous tremor in her voice. "The cake," I said. "The 5-tier architectural masterpiece is to be canceled. You will instruct the pastry team to bake it as planned, but it will be delivered to the local children's hospital with our compliments. In its place, for the wedding reception, I want a single, standard-sized sheet cake. Plain white frosting." Maria was silent for a long moment. "A sheet cake," she finally whispered, as if she couldn't believe the words. "A sheet cake," I confirmed. "And on top I want a message written in simple blue frosting. It should say just one word, congratulations." "Glenn," she started, "are you sure? This is your son. The bride will be furious." "I am counting on it," I said. "Chloe believes that my presence at the wedding would be too stressful. She uninvited me. She has also spent the last 6 months unknowingly insulting my late wife while planning her RTY in our house of business. She has mistaken our quiet dignity for weakness. This is not about revenge, Maria. This is about a lesson in respect." I could hear Maria take a slow, deep breath on the other end of the line. She knew the whole story now, without me having to spell it out. She knew what Chloe had done. "Consider it done, Glenn," she said, her voice now filled with a steely loyalty that I knew I could count on. "They'll get their sheet cake." After I hung up, I leaned back in my chair, a strange sense of peace washing over me. The trap was set. The leverage was in place. Chloe was so focused on her grand, epic content moment that she had forgotten the most important rule of all: never, ever insult the person who is making your cake. A few days before the wedding, Leo called again. This time, he sounded less like a public relations manager and more like a son who knew he was in trouble. "Dad, can I come over? We need to talk," he said, his voice low and tight. "The door is always open for you, Leo," I replied simply. He arrived an hour later, looking tired and drawn. The confident swagger he developed under Chloe's influence was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. He sat stiffly on the living room sofa, the one he'd spent countless hours on as a child, watching cartoons and building forts with the cushions. "So," he began, avoiding my eyes, "the wedding is on Saturday." "I'm aware," I said gently. "Chloe is she's really on edge. She wants everything to be perfect." "I'm sure she does," I said, deciding it was time to deploy the first small piece of my plan. I wanted to see if I could sow a seed of doubt to make him think, really think, about the woman he was marrying. "Speaking of which, how is the planning going with the caterer? Evelyn's table, wasn't it? I hope they're living up to her standards." Leo's face brightened with genuine relief. This was safe territory. "Oh, they're amazing, Dad. Unbelievably professional. Chloe has been so impressed. Their attention to detail is just off the charts. She says they're the only vendor that hasn't caused her any stress." "I'm glad to hear it," I said, letting the irony of his words hang in the air between us. "Your mother would be proud. She's the one who designed their entire service philosophy. That focus on detail, that was all her." Leo nodded, a flicker of nostalgia in his eyes. "Yeah, I remember. Mom was a force of nature with that stuff." "She was," I agreed. "Chloe is having the floral arrangements done by them as well, isn't she?" "Yes, they're stunning. some kind of cascading white rose and eucalyptus thing. Chloe designed it with their head florist. It's going to look incredible in the photos. I leaned forward slightly, my voice still soft. That's wonderful. Your mother would have loved that. White roses were her favorite. In fact, that exact combination, white roses and eucalyptus, was the centerpiece of her original branding package. She used to say it represented elegance and resilience. It's on all the old company letterhead. I watched Leo's face carefully. The information settled in and I could see the mental gears turning. A small frown appeared on his brow. He was connecting the dots. "Wait," he said slowly. "Chloe told me she came up with that design herself. She said she was inspired by some blog from Europe." "Perhaps the blog was inspired by your mother," I offered, my tone neutral. "Evelyn's work has been featured internationally for years." The confidence in Leo's posture deflated a little more. He looked around the room, at the home filled with his mother's taste, and then seemed to think about his fiancée, who had claimed that very taste as her own. I decided to press a little further. "And the cake, I hear she's designed something spectacular." "Oh yeah," he said, though his enthusiasm was now noticeably forced. "A huge 5-tier thing. It's very impressive." "I'm sure it is," I said. "It's a shame she didn't like your mother's signature cake, the lemon and elderflower. I always thought that one was the best thing Evelyn's table ever produced. It was the taste of home." Leo's eyes darted towards me, wide with surprise. "How did you know she didn't like it?" I gave a small, sad smile. "Leo, I may not be the face of the company anymore, but I still have friends there. Word gets around. I heard the tasting was specific." He slumped back into the couch, the fight completely gone out of him. He was faced with an undeniable truth. Chloe had not only dismissed his mother's legacy, she had lied about it, claiming parts of it as her own creative genius while rejecting the rest as old-fashioned. The polished, perfect image of his fiancée was beginning to crack, and for the first time, he was seeing the disingenuousness underneath. He didn't know the half of it. He didn't know I was the owner. He didn't know about the sheet cake. But this first, small reveal had done its job. I had shattered his perception of the situation. He came here to manage my feelings, but he was leaving questioning his own. "Dad, he started, then trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, son," I said, my voice kind again. "Just think about it. Think about what's important. Think about what kind of life you want to build and with whom." He left shortly after, looking more troubled than when he'd arrived. He had come to confront me about my supposed inability to let go of the past, but he had walked directly into a trap that proved he was the one who had forgotten it. The foundation of Chloe's perfect wedding was now trembling, and the main earthquake was still to come. Leo's visit had clearly rattled Chloe. In the days that followed, the atmosphere shifted. Leo's communication became sparse and stilted. I imagined Chloe was in full damage control mode, working to repair the cracks I had put in her flawless facade. She likely tightened her grip on him, convincing him that my words were just the bitter ramblings of a lonely old man, twisting my defense of Evelyn into an attack on her. The evidence came in the form of a phone call 2 nights before the wedding. It was Leo again, but this time his voice had none of the uncertainty from our last meeting. It was rigid, rehearsed. "Dad," he said without any preamble, "Chloe is very upset. She feels like you're trying to sabotage the wedding." "Sabotage it?" I asked, feigning surprise. "By telling you the truth about your mother's favorite flowers. Leo, I'm not even going to be there. How could I possibly sabotage it?" "You're playing games," he shot back, and I could practically hear Chloe whispering the lines in his ear. "You're trying to make me feel guilty. You're trying to turn me against her because you're not getting your way. Chloe says this is classic emotional manipulation." The audacity was breathtaking. She uninvited me, insulted my late wife, lied to my son, and was now accusing me of manipulation. The stakes had been raised. She wasn't just dismissing me anymore. She was actively painting me as the villain. "Is that what you believe, Leo?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "I believe that Chloe has been under an immense amount of stress and you're not helping," he said, his voice rising. "She has put her heart and soul into this day. All she wants is for it to be perfect and for everyone to be happy, and you are deliberately trying to ruin that for her." My case against her was no longer just about a few insulting comments in a file. It was about her systematic attempt to isolate me from my own son. I had the final piece of proof I needed, Leo's own words, showing how completely she had poisoned his perception. I went to my desk and pulled out the printed copy of the catering notes, the ones where Chloe had called Evelyn's signature cake simple and grandmotherly. I placed it in an envelope. This was my irrefutable proof, not some complex legal document, but her own shallow, cutting words recorded by my staff. I let out a long, slow breath, calming the anger that was churning inside me. I would not let them see me rage. My power was in my composure. "Leo," I said into the phone, my voice now devoid of all emotion, "I am done discussing this with you. I have respected your wishes. I will not be at the wedding. I will be at home, watching on a screen just as your fiancé requested. I have done nothing to interfere." I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in. "I truly hope you and Chloe get the wedding you both deserve." I hung up before he could reply. The phrase echoed in my mind, "the wedding you both deserve." It was a promise. On the morning of the wedding, I received a text from Maria. It was a photo of a simple, rectangular sheet cake, frosted in pure white. In the center, in elegant but unassuming blue script, was the single word, "Congratulations." Underneath the photo, she had typed a message. "The masterpiece is on its way to the children's hospital. This little guy is ready for his debut. Are you sure about this, Glenn?" I looked at the picture on my screen. It was so plain, so humble, so utterly and beautifully underwhelming. It was the physical manifestation of everything Chloe found distasteful: simplicity, honesty, and a lack of spectacle. It was perfect. I typed back my reply. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Let the show begin." I spent the next few hours in a state of calm anticipation. I put on a nice suit, not a tuxedo, but the dark gray suit I wore for important business meetings. I didn't turn on the livestream link Chloe had so graciously provided. I wasn't going to watch my son's wedding on a laptop. I was going to get a front row seat for the fallout. I had the envelope with Chloe's comments in my jacket pocket. My car keys were on the table. All I had to do was wait for the call I knew was coming. He call came at 8:17 p.m. The timing was perfect. The ceremony would be over. The dinner would have been served and cleared. The guests would be well fed and relaxed. It would be just about time for the toasts and, of course, the cutting of the cake. It wasn't Leo who called. It was Maria. "Glenn," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "It's happening. They just unveiled it." "And?" I asked, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. "It's everything you imagined," she said, a hint of awe in her tone. The bride took one look and her face just collapsed. Now she's screaming at the venue manager. Leo is trying to calm her down. It's a complete meltdown. The guests are all just staring. You might want to get down here. "I'm on my way," I said, grabbing my keys. "Give me 15 minutes." I drove through the city, my hands steady on the wheel. I wasn't nervous. I felt a profound and unsettling calm. I was simply a man going to check on his business, to handle a client complaint. The venue was a magnificent old ballroom with soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, the kind of place Evelyn would have adored. I bypassed the main entrance and used the service corridors, nodding to the kitchen staff as I passed. They knew who I was. Maria met me at the door leading into the main hall. "She's in the corner with Leo and her parents," Maria whispered, pointing. "She's refusing to cut it. She keeps calling it a monstrosity." I peeked through the doorway. The scene was one of beautiful chaos. The ballroom was stunning. The The guests were dressed in their finest, but all the energy was focused on a small, tense knot of people gathered around the cake table. And on that table, looking absurdly small and humble beneath the glittering chandeliers, sat the sheet cake. Chloe's back was to me, but I could see her shoulders shaking with rage. Her voice, no longer the sweet, melodic tone she used for her online followers, was a shrill, furious hiss. "This is a joke, a sick joke. This is my wedding, my one day, and it's ruined," she cried, her voice cracking. Leo stood beside her, his face pale and helpless, trying to placate her. "Chloe, honey, it's just a cake," he began. "Just a cake," she shrieked, spinning to face him. "My entire brand is built on beauty, on perfection. What am I supposed to post? A picture of that? Everyone is laughing at me. My whole life is about this, and they've ruined it." This was my cue. I pushed the door open and walked into the ballroom. A few guests turned to look, their faces a mixture of confusion and curiosity. I walked calmly and deliberately towards the scene, my footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor. As I approached, Chloe's father, a red-faced man in a tight tuxedo, was berating the venue manager. "Who is responsible for this? I want the head of the catering company here now." "That would be me," I said, my voice cutting through the drama. Every head snapped in my direction. Chloe's eyes widened, first in shock, then in pure, unadulterated fury. Leo looked as though he had seen a ghost. His jaw hung open, his face a mask of disbelief. "You," Chloe spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "What are you doing here? You were uninvited." "I'm here on business," I replied calmly, stopping a few feet from the table. I gave a polite nod to her parents. "I own Evelyn's table. I'm here to address the client's complaint." A wave of murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Leo stared at me, his mind visibly struggling to process the information. He looked from me to the company name on the catering staff's aprons and back to me. Understanding dawned on his face, followed by a wave of horror. You own it," Chloe stammered, her rage momentarily replaced by confusion. "But it's named." "It's named after my late wife, Evelyn, the woman whose taste you found so simple and grandmotherly," I said, my voice still level. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope. "You see, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. You ordered a 5-tier cake, that's true, but our company has a policy. We provide a service that reflects the client's own values. You wanted a wedding free of any stressful or sad reminders of the past. You wanted something that was all about the perfect, curated image." I opened the envelope and took out the sheet of paper. "I have here the notes from your tasting session, your direct quotes." I looked directly at Chloe, whose face had gone from red with rage to sheet white with dread. "You described my wife's signature cake as something a grandmother would serve," I said, my voice resonating in the now silent ballroom. "You demanded a showstopper for your key content moment. You made it very clear that the substance didn't matter as much as the spectacle." I paused, letting my words sink in. "So I made an executive decision. I gave you exactly what you deserved. A cake that is all surface, no substance. A plain, forgettable cake that says, 'Congratulations.' Because a marriage founded on cruelty, vanity, and a total disregard for family doesn't deserve 5 tiers of elegance. It deserves this." I placed the paper down on the table next to the cake. Chloe stared at me, speechless. All the fight had drained out of her. She was exposed, her pettiness and cruelty laid bare for all her friends, family, and followers to see. Then Leo moved. He stepped away from Chloe's side and walked towards me. He looked at the paper on the table, then at my face. His eyes were filled with a profound, dawning shame. "Dad," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She said those things." "She did," I said quietly. "And she uninvited the memory of your mother from this wedding long before she uninvited me." Leo turned back to look at the woman he had just married. Chloe opened her mouth to speak, to offer some defense, but no words came out. She just stared at him, her perfect mask finally shattered, revealing the ugly truth underneath. Leo looked at her, then at the cake, then at the crowd of people watching them. He took a deep breath, and in that moment I saw the boy I raised finally become a man. He walked back to the table, picked up the cake knife, and looked directly at Chloe. "You wanted to cut the cake," he said, his voice ringing with a cold clarity. "Fine, let's cut the cake." And with one swift, angry motion, he drove the knife not into a slice, but straight down through the center of the word congratulations, splitting it in two. The act was so final, so symbolic, that it broke the spell of the entire evening. The wedding wasn't just interrupted, it was over. Chloe let out a choked sob, a sound of pure humiliation, and fled the ballroom, her parents scurrying after her. The guests began to disperse in awkward, hushed groups, whispering amongst themselves. The perfect party had imploded. Leo stood alone by the broken cake, the knife still in his hand. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. "Dad, I am so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I was so stupid. I was so blind." I walked to him and put a hand on his shoulder. "I know, son, I know." In the chaotic aftermath, there was nothing left but the truth. The story of what had happened spread like wildfire, not just among the guests, but online. A few of Chloe's influencer friends, seeing an opportunity for their own drama-filled content, posted about the meltdown. Her carefully constructed brand of perfection was irrevocably tarnished, replaced by the humiliating reality of her behavior. The fairytale wedding had become a cautionary tale. I instructed Maria to void the entire invoice. I would not profit from my family's pain. The 5-tier cake, as promised, brought immense joy to the children and staff at the hospital, a far better purpose than serving as a prop for a hollow celebration. In the weeks that followed, Leo and I began the slow, painful process of rebuilding our relationship. He had left the venue that night and come home with me. The marriage, for all legal intents and purposes, was over before it had even begun. He was ashamed, heartbroken, and lost, but for the first time in years he was honest. "I let her convince me that your love for Mom was a burden," he confessed one evening, sitting in the kitchen where he'd watched Evelyn cook 1,000 meals. "She made me feel like my own past was something to be embarrassed by, something to hide. I'm so sorry I let her disrespect you both." "We all make mistakes, Leo," I told him. "The important thing is to learn from them. Your mother's legacy isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. It's about love that endures even through pain." We talked for hours, bridging the distance that had grown between us. I told him stories about his mother he had been too young to remember, about her fire and her kindness, her strength and her laughter. We were not just father and son. We were two men bound by the love of an extraordinary woman, finding our way back to each other. Chloe disappeared from our lives. Her social media went dark for a while, and when it re-emerged, it was a shadow of its former self. Her fall from grace was as public as her rise had been. She had wanted a perfect story, and in the end, she got one. It just wasn't the story she had planned to tell. For me, there was a quiet sense of peace. I hadn't acted out of malice or revenge. I had acted to protect a memory, to defend a legacy of love and dignity. Sitting in the quiet of my home, I felt Evelyn's presence not as a sad reminder, but as a warm, comforting strength. I had stood up for her, for us, and in doing so, I had gotten my son back. The house was no longer silent with loss. It was filled with the gentle, hopeful sound of healing.